Thank you very much for your opening salvos. I have a basic question, and I don't think that anyone has ever asked this. We have a policy, monetary policy, that pegs the Bahamian dollar to the US dollar. Who initiated it? And if we wanted to uninitiate it, who would uninitiate it? So Linda, I'm putting it on you. Is it the government or the bank?
Only the government could do that, though.
Okay.
But surely would come from the bank as a recommendation, but
I'll take a shot at what I heard, okay?
Okay.
It's not written anywhere.
Okay, we want to know.
There was an advisor in the Bahamas prior to independence, a guy, Professor Block from the University of Miami, and he was an advisor to the Ministry of Finance. So during the time when there was a crisis actually in the United States when they moved from the gold standard,
72,
and we were kind of pegged. And I think Stafford Sands would have been the finance guy and also the tourism guy. And they were doing a series of exit surveys because tourism was your bread and butter. And the major complaint once we switched, we de-linked from the UK onto the US dollar.
Right.
And I think the exchange rate would have been, it was not 1 to 1.
0.97, I think.
0.97 or something. So the tourists found out that they got a different rate where they were getting change from the taxi driver, from the hotels, from the restaurants, and from the straw market. Everybody using a different rate in the exchange, and this irritated them. And if you ever traveled in Europe prior to the euro, you know how you felt when you changed the US dollars to pounds to francs and then get it back again, and without buying anything you lost something like $6, $7, that type of thing. So Stafford apparently told Block, what should we do to stop this complaint? And he says, make it 1 to 1 and defend it. That's how I understood the peg, but like I said, this is about third, fourth hand story.
Yeah, I do agree with that story, actually.
Yeah.
That story,
He read no better than I do.
First thing it was 1972 when we lost the gold standard. I must say Mr. Sands was not around at that point.
Yeah, that's right, he wasn't there. But
He would have been. But furthermore, this change happened at different points. We, in fact, had a currency that had a premium over the US dollar. Now, I would have got my head to decide to do that. And the public told us, that makes no sense. And they didn't accept it. They depreciated it. It was 3 cents, they depreciated it. But the 1 to 1 is really a tourism kind of driven thing, because it's easy to understand, people understand it, they know internationally what it is, and it is established as a basis for the value of your currency, and people accept it. So now once you do that, though, you have to do what is necessary to make that so.
Right.
But it's a selling point, it's a tourism point. It's 1 to 1 is what it is.
It is something that evolved way back then in the 70s. I don't recall, but maybe you can, whether there has been ever a revisiting of that, a actual determination to relook at it and to think, is this the best thing for the Bahamian economy? Does any of you can think through that debate, that discussion?
In 72, Nixon took the dollar, removed the peg, that's the gold standard. The gold standard. So that required us to do something too, because we were with both sterling and the dollar. Sterling moved, and the Bahamian dollar would move. We decided, listen, we're not going to go with sterling. We're going to stay with the dollar. So we had to do something. We did stay with the U.S. dollar, but we stayed with gold, which means the sterling depreciated against us, against the dollar and gold. But we had several, there were several movements of this. The first big one was 72, when Nixon removed the gold standard. Then you had to do something.
But Mr. Francis, in his remarks, made the point that he is often asked by Bahamians about this dollar peg, the exchange control, and the other things that he mentioned, which basically, when you look at why people or how people think through or complain about this economy or monetary policy, it's really tied to this exchange, this fixed exchange rate that we have. It drives everything else. Is this still the most appropriate thing for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas today and into, say, the medium term?
Mr. Lang, I think the more appropriate question would be, if you were to move, when you move, why you move, and what are the possible consequences, the ups and the downs? Because through all of this, what has happened is the Bahamian populace, the end of all economic activity is basically to satisfy the public, not the people who put the policies in place. And right now, Bahamian picks up the Miami Herald, and there's a car on sale for $24,000. He knows that he can take 24,000 Bahamian dollars, convert it, and go and get the car. Now, for whatever reason, no matter how logical, we decide to depreciate the dollar, let's say to 50 cents. So how do you explain to him now that that car is going to cost him $48,000? You could have a riot.
Well, you have to leave town first. You have to leave town first.
Exactly.
Well, in a dollarized economy, that wouldn't arise. Dollarized economy wouldn't arise.
That's the governor is the dollarization guy, right? But here's my position.
Right.
I'm not wedded to the peg or not, but I think common sense suggests certain things. The first is that you need to have whatever you end up with if you change the currency, and it will not be one-to-one. You should have a sufficiently large amount of foreign reserves to defend any run on the currency, any shock when the change happens. If you don't have that, you'll be like many of our countries in the South, where they ran out of reserves pretty much, and the IMF forced them to devalue. And in our context, again, recall how we import practically everything. So while the visitor may get a bit of a break by using $1 to get $2 worth of our services or goods, we have to import to service them. So if we're going to serve them steak, and if we don't produce it locally, we buy it from Florida and then charge him more for it. You take the difference. Now it's going to cost you twice as much for the same steak, and he's paying half the price for it. That's not sustainable. But we starve to death, and he gets fat.
And there are two issues.
Yes, sir.
One is parity, and one's a fixed exchange rate. Now we are both. We have a fixed exchange rate
And
parity with the U.S. dollar. Now you want to have a fixed exchange rate, or I think as a little small country, small economy, you can have a problem. If you're not fixed in relation to something that's big and known, you could have a problem. Your little country, your little currency floating over there. People may not want to hold it.
In the context of a fixed exchange rate, how does the IDB, how do you view the IDB's suggestion that the Bahamian dollar is overvalued?
Didn't agree with it. I don't agree with it to begin with.
Yes, that's what they suggest, that the Bahamian dollar is by at least 20% overvalued.
I mean, that could be the case.
Yeah.
I don't know by how much, but certainly they're not looking at just the nominal exchange rate, which is the value of my currency in another currency. For example, if my currency is 1 and your currency is equal to 0.75 cents and minus $1, they're looking there at what your currency can actually buy.
So if left,
you can buy.
if left to market conditions, the currency would only buy 75 cents worth of
Right.
something versus $1.
And if you take
Perhaps.
a common
Basket.
service or good, for example, tourism, and you ask yourself in the region, if my currency is $1 and yours is 75, could I buy the same service in my country for that 75 as I can get in your country? And sometimes it's not the case, because you have to look at the other factors that influence the value of the currency. And for example, you have to look at wages in the country. Are your wages higher? Is your product as competitive as my product? Okay? All of those things help to explain the differences in the effective, what they call the effective exchange
Exchange rate.
rate.
Presumably this comes out in the value, in your balance of payments, presumably. It reflects itself in your balance of payments, eventually. If you are overvalued, you're going to have a balance of payments problem. If you're undervalued, you should have surplus. In other words, if your currency is valued right, this is a very difficult thing to determine. You may have to check, see what hamburgers cost in Hong Kong compared to what hamburgers cost here. In other words, you've got to find some commonality to determine the value. Otherwise, you have to check and see how your rate, how your exchange rate is affecting your balance of payment situation, affecting your value.
Because even if you have those differences, right? At the end of the day, if it's, say, tourism again, I may decide to go to the country that I can buy more, I can get more with the 75 and come to you. So you have to look at the factors that are making your product or service non-competitive. And in our case too, I mentioned a few factors, but it's also energy costs could influence that go into the creation of your service that makes you non-competitive. And as William said, it doesn't mean that you have, because you have these differences, that you have to devalue your currency, but you have to look at those factors that are making you non-competitive. Because if it increases, if the differences increase, what would happen is that persons will stop coming to your country and consume the service elsewhere. So that means it is a balance of payments issue, because you lose your reserves.
Yes.
Balance of payments. Ultimately, it is a balance of payments issue. Ultimately, it will be.
As I listen to yourselves, I am hearing that notwithstanding this hum in the Bahamian population about exchange control and its annoyance, the fixed exchange and its annoyance sometimes that drives the exchange control. Even if we got rid of exchange control, even if we got rid of the fixed parity, the issues that make us defend that parity will not go away. You still have to have reserves. You still have to be concerned about whether you're attractive enough to international capital. You still, and so we don't get rid of you still have to be concerned about what the government does in terms of its own fiscal deficit and borrowing and the like. So we don't get rid of those underlying issues.
I think that there's a real problem too, because we actually experienced it when we removed from the sterling. One of the large banks here lost a large amount of money, a couple of million.
$20 million as well. $20 million.
So here's what happens with the peg and the predictability when you change the currency. Imagine let's say a U.S. investor erects a condominium complex in the Bahamas, Nassau. Now, we don't lend money to U.S. to build buildings in the Bahamas. He has to bring that in. So let's say he borrows from the U.S. bank, builds a building in the Bahamas, but all of the leases on that building, so the rent he gets from that to pay this bank, but those leases are denominated in B dollars. 1-to-1. Now, he's already, gotten a long-term loan from an American bank. And overnight, we devalue, let's say, 50%. But those leases, he can't change those. It's $100 a week or $400 a month in B dollars, so I pay him that. But now he's not getting 400 US like he was, he's getting 200. And so every foreign investor who would have leases in Bahamian dollars would automatically lose whatever. And so your asset values across the board owned by foreigners would drop dramatically. We would probably never recover from something like that, the losses they would have taken in the Bahamas.
The equivalent happened in 1967. The equivalent to that happened in 1967, when sterling devalued and the Bahamian dollar did not. And that led to the Payton study, the Payton report, and led to the central bank, in effect. It led to the monetary authority being established, and then the central bank being established. Because the bank said to us, because the banks took, you're right, the banks took a big shocking of that. They said, no, but if you're going to take a decision, if you were going to take a decision like that about the parity of your currency, then you better assume the risk, exchange risk, you did the central bank.
I have not, and I'm sure if you look around the region, I know of no country that has eliminated exchange control and that has been able to maintain a fixed exchange rate.
Yeah, but that's because, sorry, I thought you were finished.
He's so eager to jump in. and what they have is they float, and they have a managed float. The best they can do is with a managed float.
Well, it makes life difficult, makes life difficult, you know?
Yes, in order to provide some stability. Everyone wants stability. And when I look at our exchange rate and why it's 1-to-1, there's confidence as well in it being that 1-to-1.
Mr. Francis?
Yeah, well, I was going to say in response to Governor Craig that the reason that we see the sort of continuous depreciation of the value of the currencies in the region is productivity vis-a-vis mainly the United States, but also, the surrounding economies. And at the end of the day, the currency is a proxy for productivity. I mean, it's a complicated calculation, but that's really what it comes down to. And the other thing I would say is this. We can continue to defend the 1-to-1 as we have done over these many years. But there's a cost to that. I mean, it can only be done by, as Governor Roll said at the beginning in his comments, by maintaining a sufficient quantity of foreign reserves, which, back the value of the currency that we claim. I think about this all the time. I've thought about it for a long time. I really suspect that at some point we probably have to introduce more competition in our economy. We have to allow this economy to fight for itself. I think that the 1-to-1 or any level that we choose to artificially sort of fix the currency at the end of the day is kind of it's a kind of nanny economy. It's just protecting something which can't survive on its own.
I don't think so, Julian.
No.
Actually, first of all, you start with a very small economy, right? Very small exports, etc. So you're importing a lot of things. But more importantly, I think with let's say you have a floating exchange rate. It means now you've got to do a lot of hedging when you purchase things. A Bahamian importer, he makes an order, let's say for $1 million worth of product. He places the order on January 1. He doesn't know what the value of his currency will be in March during delivery time. So he has to spend some money for some hedge instrument. Goes up or goes down. Conversely, the people who are supplying the service of the goods here, and these things are undergirded by trade instruments. With your the importer, he has to put a little something down and or put something in escrow, etc. I mean, it becomes very complicated, and the Bahamas doesn't have that kind of a critical mass to manage international trade with the unpredictability of its exchange rate. It'll be very costly on the public private sector.
And that's why, Mr. Lang, that's why I believe, and I really have believed this for a long time, that ultimately the answer is dollarization. It's not floating the Bahamian dollar. And I think Governor Smith is right. I mean, the Bahamian dollar is a nice to have. Yes. And we enjoy having, the portrait of whomever in the wallet and so on. But at the end of the day, as I say, it's a very costly thing, the cost of it. Look, we haven't looked at what it costs to run the central bank. Part of that cost is what we're talking about. If we had a dollar currency, Governor Roll wouldn't need to have as many.
Because you would farm your monetary policy out to the U.S.
Yeah, just a minute.
That's not exactly so, though, because...
Well, look, I mean...
The cost of the central bank is not a cost on the system. There's no cost on the system. The central bank self-finance. The central bank self-finances. Right?
But what will end up happening, though, is that the central bank, look at the machinery that the central bank would have to put in place to defend the currency, the cost of that.
No, you don't have to defend the dollar.
On dollarization.
Idea.
But dollarization, though?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you're still depending on another country's
monetary
policy.
I fully agree. And I must admit, this is the big disadvantage or drawback or psychological negative. And that's why I think we don't want to think about it. And I understand that. But I mean, there are many, look at Europe today. The whole Europe is one currency. I mean, do you think the Italians think that the euro is their currency?
I imagine that by now there must be 10 questions arising out of the audience.
But let me ask this one question.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Why are we talking about the value of the dollar? Is there a problem? Has something triggered? Is there something wrong that I missed? No, seriously. Is there something wrong that I missed? Because when your value gets so wrong, you're going to know.
Okay, all right. No, go ahead. Actually, go ahead. Okay. You speak to it.
No,
yeah.
may I answer? I'll answer you civilly. I don't believe that, I personally don't believe that the value of the dollar is really a big issue at the moment. There are times when people think about it and so on, but I don't believe it's a big issue. And anytime people ask me that, that's my answer, because that's what I really believe. But again, it is true because we defend it so well. I mean, if Governor Roll here wasn't doing the job that he is doing, then we would be worried about it. And what I'm saying is that job costs money. It's not just the employees at the central bank who, are involved in that, but there are many other costs which we could, talk about, but maybe tonight is not the time to do that.
We already see we have to have another session, so we can take some audience questions, and now go ahead, sir.
Good night, everybody. I'd like to take the...
You may want to stand because that'll help your voice project a little bit for us.
Hello, we get a microphone in, please.
I think we can hear you.
Yeah, go ahead so we can save some time for recording.
Good night, everybody. I'd like to take the discussion a little further.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Good night again. My question is specifically targeted toward Mr. Francis, but anybody can chime in. I'd just like to state a few facts first. There's research out there presently that estimates that there are going to be about 5 billion smartphone users by next year. That's my context. There was a meeting that took place this week, FinTech, and the managing director of IMF hinted at a digital currency that will be implemented or being discussed by central banks of the world. Mr. Francis, in your humble opinion, what do you think a current central bank should look like? And should it be more open than it currently is that will allow small business to take advantage of a digital economy? For example,
Okay. No, we got it. He has the question. We had the question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you. Let me say, I have to admit, I don't know enough about the digital currency. I've certainly studied it, and I know what central banks and governments around the world are doing about it. I think Governor Roll probably has more of an up-to-date picture than I would about that. But I don't believe that any country, with maybe one exception, today has adopted digital currency.
to that point,
Yeah.
in the last couple of days,
Okay, I'm going to ask you folks to let's help me control this because we run out of time, but go ahead, quickly.
in the last couple of days, at least the last 2-3 days, Singapore has implemented regulatory policy that allows for cryptocurrency. That's in order to progress their economy. The Ukraine, in the last several days, and in order to catch up, to restart their economy, has gotten about $2.1 billion from the IMF in order to create cryptocurrency.
Okay, great. Great. So.
Let me just say one thing.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
I believe that this is a very small, an infinitesimal part of global money, and these are essentially experiments for the time being, and so I think it's early.
Okay. Next question. I just wanted to get some. Yes, go ahead now.
So you talked earlier about
Mike. Mike is here. The moderator is here. The mic is coming to you, ma'am. Go ahead. Right here.
Good night.
Good night.
Mr. Miller, you talked earlier about factors that affect the operation of fiscal and monetary policy in the Bahamas in ways that they don't necessarily in every country. And just to continue in that vein, for anybody to respond to, the IDB's 2010 to 2017 country valuation report says that a key constraint on economic development and growth in the Bahamas is the weakness of skills in the labor market. They refer to a low graduation rate, a high immigration rate of college-educated citizens, the poor results from their training programs. And so I'm wondering how this affects the efficacy of these policy instruments, given that we've already admitted there are constraints on efficacy.
Thank you. Anyone?
I have a very good question. But there are a couple of questions in that, right? The first one that comes to my mind is, what are we doing sufficient in our social development programs to improve the education, to deal with that education problem? One of the big problem, big issues in fiscal affairs is our ability to lead development, national development, social development of the country. Now, what you said suggests to me that we have not been doing that very well. Our people are falling back, they're falling behind. They are behind. But why are they behind? Now, to address that, you need to spend more money. Fiscal, you want to spend more. You've not been spending enough. And social development to deal with that. For example, crime, to a great extent, crime can also be traced to a lack of social development or social intervention, whatever you call it. Right? But that's an issue. They all bear on the development of the country.
And ties into the productivity issue that Mr. Francis
The
mentioned.
productivity is central to it. Actually, I disagree with Sir William. I don't think it's a question of how much money you spend. What the problem is that we have the habit in this country of deciding where the money should be spent for the people. We need to allow the economy to function. That's how you improve that.
Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say good evening to the panel and to you, Shivargo, for putting this on, because it's very timely.
Thank you.
33
Question,
seconds.
please.
I'm going to make a couple statements.
No, you're going to give me a good question, please, so we can move it along.
Yeah, what kind of formula did we use for the third richest economy in the hemisphere, not the Caribbean, to be junk bond status in a few short years? You say we're $12 billion, but I see in the WTO BAH insert last week that it clearly states we do $3 trillion a year. Now, I need to review that with all of you. Turks and Caicos dollarized, I've been there, and they're British, right? And they refuse to use the pound. They're on US dollars. So what are they doing right? What's Cayman doing right at $1.25 to a US dollar? Dollarized, gentlemen. Governor Rowe, I spoke to you in the Hilton and said this 2 years ago. If you dollarize, you can't keep printing money and going into debt. If you don't bring in new US currency or other currencies, you can't pay people. And that will make you creative real quick when you start having...
All right, thanks.
What can we do? Lang, I'll wrap up with this. 20 years ago, I said energy security would affect where we are today. We spend $1.1 billion a year on fuel. If we could solarize and put the $1.1 billion on the debt or any portion of it, you wouldn't be sitting here tonight. And I love listening to an analog problem in a digital world. Exchange is no problem for these young people in a digital economy and dispensation.
Thank you.
Chicago, one thing.
Graham.
No one has said anything about cryptocurrency tonight. No one has said how that will affect central banks and circumvent our central bank.
Okay, so we got, right. Let me respond to, anybody wishes to respond to that point, please? Anyone? No? Dr. Rogers, I think, had a question.
Yes, yeah.
Mike, please. I love the country. There you go. Thank you. Yes.
I agree with Mr. Francis.
I don't know, the micro level seems a little...
I agree with Mr. Francis. The big problem we have in the Bahamas is that we're underproducing, especially underproducing in terms of US dollars. If you look at the balance of payments in 2014, 15, 16, and 17, we were $1 billion short of US dollars. Errors and omissions speaks to where that $1 billion came from, the underground economy. No matter whether you have a pegged currency, a floating exchange rate, a dual currency, or a dollarization, we need to get more dollars coming into the country. And that's the main concern. The problem with the peg is that when you have a overvalued currency, is that you import far more than you should, and you export far less than you could. And that produces macroeconomic problems, increasing levels of debt every year. So in order to get the dollars coming in, we now have to think creatively. And one of the things we need to do, I believe, is we need to make these direct foreign investors have their treasuries in the Bahamas. So the monies spent on tourism actually come into the Bahamas and not paid by credit card and stay in the United States. we also need to allow foreigners to buy Bahamian dollar debt. We need to open up exchange control and allow Bahamians to invest abroad, and the dividends, the rents, will come back into the country. We also need to allow Bahamians to bring their monies back into the country, because it's estimated $2 to $3 billion out there of Bahamian foreign currency that could come back into the country.
So can
So
we then...
if we do those things, we would ease the U.S. dollar problem, and this would ease the...
Let's see if these
problem of
good,
debt.
these good governors could respond to that. Anybody wishes to comment on that? Any one of you?
Well, I wanted to make a comment on, a very brief comment on the dollarization, because I must confess, what has always intrigued me about this is, how does a country with a large amount of debt dollarize? When you speak of Cayman and these places, they have not central banks, but monetary authorities where those countries have very little or no debt, so their currency is valued, like for every US dollar they have, there's one Caymanian dollar. They can match it 1-to-1. We used to be able to do that too when we had a currency board. But the minute you begin to create debt, here is the problem. If you take every Bahamian dollar loan, and I think it could be as high as 7 billion maybe, the debt, the debt, excluding the government debt.
6 billion.
About 6 billion, right? Right, and this is the part that you could help me with, because I can never understand. We dollarize, so the $6 billion that we owe becomes now 6 billion US.
No.
Okay.
No. When you dollarize, I think somebody said it earlier, you dollarize at the price or the value of your currency at the time that you do the dollarization. I think you said that.
Yeah. No, but see, the other point is, like, there's a difference between that second tier of money in deposits and, let's say, money in circulation. For instance, I don't know how much B dollars we have to incinerate every week, the usage, they come out.
Right.
So the Federal Reserve is under no obligation to replace them the way we have to purchase the currency from Canada or the UK, right? The bills. And the only country I think that the Federal Reserve will give US dollars to in exchange for the crumpled notes that they take out of circulation would have been Panama, under some special treaty in Congress.
Yeah.
So as you begin to lose your US dollars in circulation, I have always wondered, how do you replace them?
Yeah.
We send them back.
Yes, of course.
With the ones that you no longer...
Yeah.
The ones that, as they come in, we take them and send them back.
The U.S. has more counterfeit thingam around the world than they have within. Okay, so they don't take back that money like that.
Yeah, but James, don't forget now, I mean, most of the currency transactions today are really electronic. They're not physical dollars. So this issue of, the wear on the currency and counterfeit and so on, I don't think that that's the biggest issue.
But it's diminishing anyway. The issue is diminishing.
That's a practical issue. But of course, the central issue is who controls your monetary policy.
We will,
Yeah.
I agree with that.
we will take 2 more questions before we wrap up. So I think we have a gentleman wanting, yes, and then we get one here.
Yes,
We got one over there, yes?
Good job to the panel tonight. As the gentleman was asking the question over there, Switzerland, this is an offshore financial services country, ran into a lot of difficulties during the Panama Papers, and they had to release a lot of U.S. clients' information, and so Switzerland had to reinvent themselves. What Switzerland did was, there's a place in Switzerland called Zug that has become Crypto Valley. So all the cryptocurrency companies of the world are setting up in Zug, Switzerland. All the bankers who were unemployed are now employed in the cryptocurrency blockchain space. So when we're talking about innovation, growth, getting more dollars in our economy, when we look at blockchain and cryptocurrency, we see where countries in the region are actually passing legislation to be able to adopt cryptocurrency policy, blockchain companies. I just want to ask the panel, what are your thoughts on it? If you Google Switzerland, Zug, Switzerland, you'll see the Crypto Valley, and also innovation and technology. The Bahamas does not innovate and create. That is why we are behind. I want you all to be able to discuss that, and I want to get your perspective on that.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
If I may, I've read that the central bank itself has been doing some things, and maybe Governor Rowe might want to speak to that. Which you were having a look at some cryptocurrencies. Yes.
You're doing some licensing, right? But
I think Securities Commission is coming out with
We're looking at digital version of the domestic currency. We do not call it a cryptocurrency. It's
Thank you.
digital central bank currency. It's no different from the notes that you have in your pocket. There are lots of pitfalls with cryptocurrency. The payment side of it is not disputable. Where we're doing a lot of championing is around the technology, the blockchain technology, security and the ease at which it makes to do transactions in the electronic space. So the term cryptocurrency, I think, is getting, misused and pasted on every single thing. But you need to distinguish that, I think, a lot more from the blockchain. And those who have aspirations of getting rich, of, I call it nothing, wafer, you can also lose everything that way, right? So these instruments still have to be grounded in something, some value. And that is where the central bank currency has some backing, because ultimately governments stand behind central banks and the currency liabilities, and behind the government are you, the taxpayers.
exactly.
There are no taxpayers behind any cryptocurrency that's issued.
We've got one more question here, please. Thank you, sir.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My question is to all of the former governors. For a young UB student who may be listening to this presentation tonight, whose dream it has always been to be the governor of the central bank, what would you recommend as a career path for a future central banker?
Great question. Great question.
That a dream is a nightmare. Get a degree in nursing.
No answers.
Monetary theory and policy. Study monetary
So
theory and
economics, finance, certainly education, and education you should pursue, and then trying to have some experience within that finance economic space, and then of course trying to get to the central bank, because all of them come up through the bank, most of them.
Yeah, and I would think too that, the central bank has opportunities for persons to get exposure in what the central bank is all about. So if there's a young person who's interested, try and get a summer job or something to learn more about the central bank.
Just a quick plug. Next year, we're starting a young professional program, so you must have a master's degree to get into that, no prior work experience. And we have also, we encourage people to have bachelor's degrees in economics to consider the bank. But one of the things that we will be doing differently is that those who are coming in with BAs, we expect that you have an interest and an aptitude to eventually go on and do graduate studies as well, so that we can get more people in the pipeline to become central bankers.
May I just answer the gentleman, please?
I would just like to answer the gentleman from my perspective. I really do not believe that there is any discipline which is more relevant than economics. You have to be excellent at economics. I mean, obviously I'm not. But really, if you look around the world at the best central bankers, that's the background.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there's not I'm sure, Mr. President, Madam Provost, you will agree that if the Member of Parliament for Centerville wants to raise a question, that I should let him raise his question. It should be on.
It's on? Hello?
Yes.
Thank you very much. And, it's a pleasure to be here to listen to such dialogue. I just want to ask a question, and I think it's where Shivago would have started, speaking about monetary policy, because it wasn't until tonight I realized that our monetary policy was pegged to parity and the US dollar and its reserve. What I'd like to know is, have any of you pushed the monetary policy any further in terms of affecting interest rate movement in the country? Because there is this thought that the central bank does not help to, with its influence, to the clearing banks to reduce interest rates in the country, and therefore, of course, lending becomes, borrowing becomes very costly.
You all notice how deliberate these central bankers are?
No, but there's a problem that we're having now in terms of the excess liquidity and that sort of thing. I believe, and Governor Craig may help here, I believe there was an internal study some years ago within the central bank, and they found that Bahamians were not very sensitive to movements in interest rates. And what they really wanted was the loan. All right? And so the bank started, basically charging what you can bear, because the bank would publish what they call the average rate overall, but there are some people who, depending on the bank, are getting very good rates on the deposits. You and me probably getting 0 or 0.1. And then the loan rates are up and down, because the society at large seems sometimes insensitive to the rate. They find it's more difficult to get the loan. And so there's a problem in there, where in other countries, you compare interest rates because there's so many banks, so much competition, as Julian Francis likes to push. But we don't have that kind of competition here. Each bank gives you almost the same fund. It's more like an oligopoly. And I don't know the degree to which the central bank can, at this stage, influence that, unless, of course, you promote more banks.
Particularly if the banks are not borrowing from the central bank.
Well, that's true, too.
There's a spread, though. The spread is almost 10% from time to time. The spread between lending and borrowing, the spread between the rates, interest rates, it's about 10% sometimes.
Yeah.
No one seems to,
Mr. Trippon, I think the answer to your question, in my opinion, is this. As I think Sir William and Governor Smith were just saying, we really do not have effective markets in this economy. And if you don't have effective markets, you don't have price finding. Prices do not find their right levels. The central bank is not supposed to be a kind of decider of what prices should be in the economy. That's not the role of the central bank. Central bank is a regulator, in fact. And it is there to ensure that the economy, as far as possible, remains in equilibrium. That is to say, if there's so much money, that by and large, interest rates should reflect the quantity of money and the demand of money and so on.
it never does, though. Never does, though.
Well, no, it's not perfect. That's my point. That we do not have a market, and so these things do not work here. That's another problem of smallness, really. But honestly, I don't believe there is an answer to the question you raise. The central bank cannot go and tell the banks what rates to charge. You don't want that, in fact.
It's just the idea of influence and moral suasion. The way you can help to persuade them by you lowering your interest rate.
But as Sir William said, it doesn't really work. I mean, if the central bank were to reduce its discount rate today, I'm not so sure that it would have any impact on the range of interest rates that we see out there.
You have no influence
Well, I'm not saying we have no influence, or the bank has no influence. I'm saying that at different times, that influence might be reduced. And this is one of those times, I believe, because I think maybe Governor Rowe referred to it at the beginning. There's a lot of liquidity in this market today, which means that there's very little that the central bank can do to influence rates in the market. Now, it can go in maybe, and I don't even know if it has the legal authority to do it, to, fix the rates. But again, that's not what the central bank does.
The mark of a good debate is that, yes, I'm here. The mark of a good debate is that the panelists continue to engage in dialogue and the audience doesn't want to stop. I'm standing on protocol this evening. Permit me simply to say good evening to all. As Provost, this has been a delight. As the Provost of the University of the Bahamas, it's a pleasure to thank all of you for supporting this inaugural policy forum hosted by the Government and Public Policy Institute. The Government and Public Policy Institute is one of UB's, as you've heard, centers of excellence. It is poised to offer a series of highly sought-after services in research, in design, and the implementation of public policy. It should be no surprise, then, to all of you that we recruited one of our brightest minds and native sons to lead this institute, Executive Director and Senior Policy Fellow, Mr. Zhivago Lang. Thank you, Mr. Lang, for joining us in advancing this most appropriate inaugural event. The panel of governors, very, very impressive. Thank you, panelists, for the engaging and informative discourse. What a treat this has been. I am sure that each and every one of you in here would agree. Yes? Thanks to all other program participants for your contribution, and you the audience for participating in this conversation. You're not following the cue cards. The consulars, thank you. Media, and of course our own internal Office of University Relations, who has worked tirelessly to ensure that everything was in place. As with all others at UB, we work together to support these efforts. Finally, of course, thanks goes out to the Office of GPPI, get used to that acronym, Government and Public Policy Institute, colleagues Jeannie Gibson and Marcia Smith. You might not have seen them, but they were here bubbling around. They've done quite a bit behind the scenes. I trust, and I must swear, was Addison, all that he does, making sure that the microphones and everything are working. Don Sargent and all of our colleagues behind the scenes streaming. I trust that this inaugural event has given you a taste of what is to come. Upcoming policy fora will be announced in the coming months, weeks even. I'm sure that something is afoot for as early as the new year through our local media, through the University of the Bahamas' website. University of the Bahamas will be pushing out all sorts of PR through our various media outlets. If you do, feel free to contact the office, the Institute directly. If you want to learn more about some of the things that they have planned, we invite you to engage them directly. We look forward to seeing more of you, not only those of you who are here physically, but those of you who listened to the streaming live. Good night to all of you, and do enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you for coming.